Growing up, I just missed the SNES era, and when it comes to the classic SNES games, I either played them through ports and re-releases, or missed them entirely. With the constant stream of new games to play, going back to catch up on some classic titles is a little bit daunting. Donkey Kong Country is one of the games that I missed. My only memory of the game is seeing school friends playing the Game Boy Color port. I remember being pretty captivated at the visuals. The 3D style graphics were a sight to behold on a handheld, but at that point, we were already in the thick of the N64 era. It didn't hit me as hard as it would have a few years prior. Without counting Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, my first true Donkey Kong platformer was Returns on Wii. I have fond memories of playing Donkey Kong Country Returns, but nothing really sticks with me. I never completed it, and I don't revisit it much. Maybe I was just too young to appreciate it. I mean, Returns was a pretty difficult game, maybe it was just a little over my head. But once the Wii U rolled around, I actually skipped Tropical Freeze entirely. For some reason, I just wasn't feeling it. I started to think that maybe the DKC series just wasn't for me. Nothing against these games, I just didn't get the appeal. Sure, I liked them enough, but I was far more loyal to Mario. 2D Mario felt safe, comfortable, and familiar. I grew up playing the GBA ports of Mario 2, 3, and World countless times. There was something about these games where I just kept coming back. Anytime there was a new Mario game, I simply had to have it. I don't know why, but to me, the DK games just seemed like a lesser version of Mario's offerings. They didn't have the same impact. Years went by where I'd still say, I'm not really a DKC guy, but my curiosity and desire to revisit the series was building. And as a result of the continuous high praise and a good eShop sale, I eventually bit the bullet and bought Tropical Freeze for the Switch. My first few hours with Tropical Freeze felt like more of the same. Yeah, this is great and all, it's definitely pretty to look at and pleasant to play, but again I dropped off of Tropical Freeze after only a few hours. I actually remember trying co-op with a friend and both of us literally falling asleep mid-level. Although, to be fair, I don't think this was fully the game's fault. It was almost 3 in the morning. Tropical Freeze just couldn't seem to hold my attention. I was starting to think of it as just another game that would sit in my backlog for years to come. For a while, when looking at my game library, I would feel just a little bit embarrassed that I fell for the trap again and bought yet another game that I knew just wasn't for me. However, a few months ago, I randomly decided to return to Tropical Freeze as I felt in the mood for a 2D platformer. In the moment, it was tough to explain why, but after a while, the game just started to click. Thinking about it now, I've heard people explain that they love Tropical Freeze for its slick controls, or for the music, or the level design. The fact that all the level elements are woven into the backdrops with purpose, creating a world that truly feels alive. And I mean, I definitely agree with all of this too. When it comes to game design, these are all things that I greatly respect, and Tropical Freeze really nails all of them. But to me, all of this is just nice. None of this is what actually pulled me in and made Tropical Freeze the Donkey Kong Country game that finally hooked me. It was actually the difficulty spike in Tropical Freeze that made the game finally click with me. After an easy first few levels, I reached a point where I was constantly dying and getting stuck on certain stages. I wasn't just parading through the worlds and going through the motions. Rather, I was hitting some truly challenging platforming levels, and each level that got in my way felt like a serious roadblock, a challenge that forced me to learn and improve if I wanted to progress. In Tropical Freeze, each level I eventually conquered made me feel like I mastered it. Through my failures, I was learning and getting better, and for me, this feeling is what made me finally understand the appeal of Donkey Kong Country. After beating Tropical Freeze and finally connecting with the series for the first time, I was inspired to go back and discover its roots with my newfound appreciation for its difficult yet rewarding gameplay loop. I finally completed Donkey Kong Country for the SNES. I came to DKC 1 soon after playing Tropical Freeze, and right away I was amazed at how close the original's controls felt to a game that came almost 20 years later. Donkey Kong Country's controls feel extremely tight and smooth, just like the more modern DKC title. And with the exception of Donkey Kong's movement speed feeling a little bit sluggish, the control system in DKC 1, I believe, can compete toe-to-toe with any modern-day platformer. Both Donkey and Diddy Kong have a single jump and a roll. Diddy Kong moves quite a bit faster than Donkey, making him typically my more preferred Kong, but both characters can pick up speed and momentum if you roll into enemies, and this speed increases if you attack enemies in a chain. The way the game's levels are designed and how enemies are presented gives the player ample opportunity to utilize this role. This gives you the ability, if you're brave enough, to blow through levels at high speeds, rolling through and bouncing off enemies in pursuit of the exit sign at the end of each level. Although if you're playing DKC for the first time, I don't foresee you speedrunning through any of these levels, and this is mostly due to the difficulty. I think for many first-time players, you'll approach the game similarly to how I did, carefully making your way through each stage, desperately trying to avoid hazards and to not fall off the course. Now, this is not me trying to make light of your gaming skills. I truly think this game is hard, and despite having the tools to do so, I don't think most people will be able to breeze through the levels in quick succession, at least not without some trial and error, learning the intricacies of each stage as they go. When it comes to the graphics, obviously they're amazing for the time period, and they're really cool to look at retroactively. The 3D models turned 2D sprites give the game a fantastic stylized look that, as long as you're not looking for realism, really holds up today. The music is fantastic and super catchy, with some pieces that will get stuck in your head long after you turn the console off. There are some all-time great tracks in this game, like DK Island Swing, which is absolutely iconic at this point. In most cases, the music fits perfectly with the environment you're traversing. Each level seems like a set piece that's really crafted with care, built with supreme attention to detail. Levels are fully realized parts of this game world, and no elements are placed arbitrarily. This type of detailed level design is a hallmark of the DKC series, and it all started with the original. You should be glad the levels are constructed with such care too, because odds are you'll be spending a long time on many of them. I know I did. Now, I played DKC 1 on Nintendo Switch through the Switch Online Super Nintendo catalog. This means I had the full capability to use save states. After my first game over, I was tempted to start again using save states, but something told me not to. See, in DKC, there's only one Candy Kong save point in every world, and generally they're placed somewhere in the middle. If you use up all your lives before reaching Candy Kong, you'll be forced to start the world over from the very beginning. If I saved state after every cleared level, I most likely would have shaved a handful of hours off my final playtime. But ultimately I decided against it, and I'm glad I did. While it's undeniably frustrating to have to start over a world and redo a bunch of hard levels just to get back to that point you were at before, I personally believe this adds to the experience. When the game forced me to replay these levels over and over again, I felt like I was mastering them. I knew what was around every corner, and soon, a level that used up all my lives in the past, I was now clearing without getting hit. In DKC, the save system reinforces what I believe to be the main appeal of the game. Intense platforming that forces you to master the course, hard-earned satisfaction when finally conquering a tough level, and the sweet relief of finding that next save point and making it just a little bit further through DK Island. See, this is the concept that makes my relationship with Donkey Kong Country a little bit complicated. The game made me furious, but if it wasn't for that challenge, it would not have been as appealing. This is where, in my opinion, DKC edges ahead of most other platformers. Now, I didn't want this video to become a comparison to the Mario games, but Mario is the 2D platformer I'm most familiar with, so a little bit of comparison makes sense when it comes to me talking about my experience of learning to love Donkey Kong Country. I love 2D Mario games. I would still say I prefer 2D Mario games over DKC games. But here's a key difference I noticed between the two. Generally, 2D Mario isn't hard unless you make it hard. What I mean by this is, Mario levels are generally not too difficult to get through. With some exceptions, the level design and checkpointing makes it so, in traditional Mario games, most players will get from point A to point B relatively easily. Generally, in Mario games, where the true challenge lies is in collecting the trickily placed collectibles like green stars or Yoshi coins. In DKC, there are also bonus rooms to find and Kong letters to collect, but the key difference is that these levels start hard. Just getting through the level itself is tricky. Generally, there are more hazards and more difficult terrain, and oftentimes it seems like the level is actually designed to trick or trap you, like that last Kremlin in Minecart Carnage, or the fish in the poison pond that just seem to come out of nowhere. It's stuff like that that makes first-time clears extremely rare in DKC, whereas in Mario games they're fairly common. In Donkey Kong Country, the road to success is through trial and error, learning from past failures and knowing what will come next. While frustrating at first, this style of game design leads to a true sense of mastery and reward that an easier platformer simply doesn't reach. Take the Queen Bee boss fight for example. My first few attempts at the boss were pretty pitiful, but this was until I started learning its attack patterns, and once I did, I felt invincible. Once I learned the fight, I felt like I could do it in my sleep. This is exactly the kind of reward that DKC gives you. It gives the player a high. I liken it to memorizing lines for a speech or learning to play a song on the guitar. You might fail at particular points time and time again and start to feel hopeless, but through repetition, as you keep coming back, you naturally learn and get better. This visceral sense of progress and improvement is what finally sold me on DKC. Death after death, game over after game over, I was getting better. Slowly I learned each part of each difficult level until they became easy, and I was no longer wasting lives on them, allowing me to finally reach that next checkpoint. While making my way through the game, I'd often sit down with it for an hour or so and make no tangible progress. Maybe I'd beat a level or two, but in most cases I would fail to reach a save point and have to just start over from the exact same spot on my next play session. It seemed as though I was just wasting my time. I was making no progress, like I never even picked up the controller at all. However, as I started making gradual progress through the game, I realized this wasn't actually the case. For each hour or two I would play the game, I was still learning and getting better with each failed attempt. It almost sounds like a cliche, like try and try again, or you learn from your mistakes, but with DKC this is exactly what happens. You do learn from your mistakes, and this is what was gratifying about the game for me. I could care less about the monkeys and the jungle and the critters. It's the brutal levels and the unforgiving save system that tapped into the addictive part of my brain that wants to rise to the challenge and improve, to learn through repeated failures and finally claim victory. This is what really pulled me in. Now, I know that DKC is not the only tough platformer out there that can evoke these kinds of feelings. There are plenty of hard games out there, but I believe there is a balance. A game can't just be hard for the sake of being hard. It has to feel like a complete experience to be rewarding. And I believe this is what Donkey Kong Country does exceptionally well. It balances charm and beauty with some tough as nails gameplay, making for an intimate gaming experience that can completely draw you in if you let it. Was I always having fun while playing Donkey Kong Country? Absolutely not. Am I glad that I stuck it through and played it? Definitely. Many of these DKC stages now own some permanent real estate in my brain, and now every time I revisit them in the future, I'll be reminded of the hours I spent sunk completely into these beautiful levels. I'll recall the anguish I felt at every death, and the cathartic sighs of relief after every successful completion.